Hello everyone and welcome to the Hobbyguard. Am I recording? Yes, I am recording. Hell yeah, let's go. In today's video, I will be talking about Grimdark, how to make Grimdark worlds interesting. I will be focusing on the example of Warhammer 40k or Warhammer in general. Not because this is a Warhammer YouTube channel. In fact, I intend this channel to cover a whole lot more other than Warhammer. This is a hobby channel and anything can be a hobby. But regardless, today's topic is Grimdark, and why do I feel like modern authors, not only in Warhammer, but just in general, have such a hard time finding a balance between telling a Grimdark story without either, which is what we see, I don't know which one we see more often, but basically there's two issues with the quote-unquote Grimdark stories that I get to see nowadays. The first issue, I would like to say, is how in the Grimdark stories that we read, we often find an unhealthy dose of current modern day morality. Now, people may think, why does that upset you? And I will address all of that in a minute. But the other issue that we get to see is not current modern day morality, but an excessive sort of, I would say, transgressive instead of progressive. Just an absolutely transgressive edginess, people that go overboard with the grim darkness. And authors in general or storytellers in general seem to have such a hard time finding the right balance between those two. So with that being said, in the background you will be seeing here's my pen. Footage of me drawing my fan art. Where's my glove? How are people gonna believe that I am actually a serious digital artist if I don't wear that funny glove that digital artists like to wear? It makes me feel sort of like Gambit from X-Men, even though his gloves I don't think were quite like this. I don't know. I'm a dork, not a nerd, as I have said in other videos. But anyways, lost my train of thought. Give me a moment. Yes. And the background here, I will be continuing with my never-ending drawing of the fan art from the short story The Keys of Hell by John French, I believe. And whatever, short story that I love, very grimdark, very awesome. And yeah, don't worry too much about looking at the screen, I suppose. Just think of me as a companion, if you will, through this, your time, your hobby time. Maybe I should turn these hobby talks into more of a podcast. Perhaps YouTube would treat my algorithmics better, my metrics better, if I just labeled it as a podcast and not just any video. But anyways, this is your time. So with that being said, let me take my wizard hat off. And let's open up with our hobby meditation. Let's open up and give ourselves this time, however long it takes, of just enjoying our hobby. Or if you are doing the dishes or working, whatever it is, just think of me as a floating head that's whispering nonsense inside of your ear. It's pretty moist in here. You should really clean more often in here, but thank you for accepting me inside your ear. And with that being said, just let's take a moment to center ourselves in the present. No more doom scrolling, no more responsibilities. Just take a deep breath and repeat after me. You don't have to say this out loud. You can just say this in your head, because I know that not everyone's an autistic weirdo like myself. This is my time. Deep breath. This is my hobby time. I shall not feel ashamed of giving myself some time for my own hobbies. For my body, my mind, and my soul are the vessels through which the universe experiences itself through my eyes. And who am I to go against the universe's wishes if I am autistically engaged by painting some miniature soldiers? So be it. I did not choose this life. It chose me, and I shall not feel ashamed to dedicate some time to myself. Sorry, again, deep breath. Begone all them responsibilities of the mundane world. So what? Wifey or roommate or parents if I just did my clothes and I did not hang them right away after getting them out of the laundry machine. I do not care if my clothes are a bit wrinkly, no. I care more to take my vessel into the garage, into the shop, and to service it, because this is how I function in the world. This is my time, this is my hobby time, so deep breath. And with that being said, let's begin. Let me put my wizard hat back on, and I will begin drawing and talking again. This is not, once again, sorry, finally 5 minutes into the video I begin the topic of the video. This is not a Warhammer only related video, but I will be mainly talking about Warhammer. But please feel free to transpose this, as I usually say, even though that might not be the right word because I barely speak in English at all, into any sort of Grimdark hobby that you might be thinking of, or narratives, or just those narratives that have a bit more grit to it, a bit more darkness to it, because, you know, the world needs weirdos like myself as well, who don't need anything to be completely sanitized, who do not get a kick out of this enforced positivity and enforced modern day morality that we get to see in all our hobbies. Not hobbies, but in just in general, just in media in general. So, for example, again, going back to Warhammer, I have produced a lot of content talking about why Warhammer has become and is becoming a lot less grimdark in the recent years. And surprisingly enough, a lot of people disagree. I shouldn't say surprisingly enough. I guess when I was very new to... By the time I got deep into this hobby, into this universe, because I won't get too much into my backstory with it in this video, but I guess I always knew about Warhammer. I just... I shouldn't say always, but since a very young age, I knew about Warhammer. Just the price of entry was too high for a young kid like myself in Mexico. Mind you, I am Mexican. It wasn't very accessible at the time. But anyways, I was that weird kid sitting at the back of the class. And my mom and I was absolutely into like violent and epic, heroic, grimdark stories and dark fantasy sort of stuff, right? So I was drawing in my sketchbook all sorts of edgy stuff just because, well, that's what I got a kick out of. I guess that's just how my brain is wired. I understand that not everyone is this way and not everyone should be this way. But there is nothing wrong with telling grimdark stories. There is nothing wrong with telling stories in which your morality, or rather the morality of the story, is not compatible so much so with today's morality. I guess I didn't finish my previous train of thought, my previous idea, which was to say, ever since I joined the hobby, don't mind too much these horrible lines that I am drawing here. This is not obviously gonna end up being where the actual lines end. This is just a guide for myself that I do on top of the sketch that I already did previously, so I sketched over and over a million times, and this is why it takes me forever to finish a single drawing. But anyways, as I was saying, ever since I joined the hobby, people have been arguing about this online, and at first I didn't believe it until I started actually consuming a lot of Warhammer stories, and I can see it's very easy. I made a whole video the other day physically showing, I guess not physically, virtually, but graphically showing you the difference between the old art and the new art. And in my opinion, that carries on to the stories and the lore as well. It's just undeniable how soft some of these stories have become. Not all of them, mind you, not in the Warhammer universe. You may still find a lot of grimdark here and there, but it is a sad truth that in general, this world, this amazing fictional world that I love to visit pretty much every day, has become a lot softer, a lot more vanilla, it has begun to lose a lot of its soul, you could say. Now, why do I think authors are so afraid or so reluctant to fully embrace the grimdarkness of the 41st millennium? Well, I just think that they are not approaching it with the right idea in mind. It is my honest belief that with the access to information, the unprecedented access to information that our later generations have been exposed to, we have all become a lot more politically and socially minded, which is not by itself a bad thing. In fact, I would argue it is a good thing. Now, it is good that humans are more conscious. I had in one of my videos where I was describing that I was sort of apolitical just in general in my life, and someone got I wouldn't say they got mad at me, but they started arguing with me about how much politics are important, and people like myself who don't care about politics end up just being part of the issue. And yeah, no, I agree. It's not that I don't have any politics. You could argue that I do have politics. The issue is I know to which the extent of my opinion of things actually matters, if that makes sense. And there is a time and place to be political. There is a time and place to project your own morality onto things. And there is a time and place to fight for your ideals. Now, I think that the issue is that, again, going back to how exposed to information as we are nowadays, it's for a lot of people it becomes very frustrating to realize how little power for change we actually have. Normal humans like you and myself who don't wield power over thousands, if not millions, of people, because there are two breeds of human. Basically, those who wield power over thousands, the rulers, the ruling class, and by this I don't necessarily mean politicians, just people whose every day-to-day decision and actions will affect thousands of people consciously, knowingly. More likely than not, you and I won't have really that issue. We won't really suffer too much from that, and that is a blessing in disguise, I would argue, but that's a topic from another video. That's certainly a bit more deep than I have time to get into, I should say, today. So yeah, we've realized how powerless we are in one way, but we don't really accept how powerless we are. So all of us have grown up with stories, at least not all of us, but a lot of people in my generation, and I want to say I'm a millennial, right? So maybe my generation and the previous one and the next one up, we've been I don't want to say propagandized, but we grew up on stories about people making change and effectuating change and so on. So instead of being courageous and putting ourselves out there, we started looking at problems everywhere, and instead of thinking actually I don't have a lot of power and I should just focus more on myself and my own agency in my body and my mind and my soul, intellectual agency, economic power, and spirituality as well, and physical power as well. What's easier than that? Well, just to become an ideologist. And with ideology, since we live in at least here in the West, I guess I've traveled a bunch throughout the world, but here in I want to say first world countries, again, I come from a different country and I've lived in different countries throughout my life, so I do have some experience in this, and I've met different people from different cultures. So believe me when I say that if you're watching these, let's say in certain parts of Europe or the Americas, United States, whatever it is, you might be more privileged than you would like to admit, right? But we have been exposed through information, overwhelming amounts of information, some would say, to all the troubles in the world. And we are incapable of accepting sometimes how privileged we are compared to other people. And if we accept it, we become very ideologic and very moralist and sort of very fixated on what we can do to improve the world, and we start to disregard the concerns of our everyday fellow privileged human, because, well, there's people out there who have it worse, right? Again, that by itself, I think it's a good thing. It's a consciousness thing. It's an awareness thing. That by itself is not bad. The issue with it, I think, is that we, or the people, the storytellers who produce most of the media that we consume nowadays, certainly most of the mainstream media, is that they start to permeate it with their own morality, as if through that they may change the world. And finally, I will go back to Warhammer after rambling for minutes and minutes on end. Take Warhammer, for example. And I will use the example of author Mike Brooks because I have it on good authority from other Warhammer 40k YouTubers that he is a very woke author. And, you know, in retrospect, I have read his books. And yes, this is a person who does not appreciate the world of Warhammer. For example, he wrote a book on the return of Lionel Johnson. After 10,000 years of slumber, the lion awakens to find a galaxy completely blinded by faith and superstition and fear of progress and so on and so on. Basically, the world that we have come to love and embrace as Warhammer, as what it means to be Warhammer. Now, what is the author's response to it through the voice of the lion? It is not to analyze and say, how did things actually get this wrong? Okay, are these people onto something? Do they have a reason? How has humanity, first of all, survived in this state for 10,000 years? What is it that they're doing right? What is it? I can obviously see what they're doing wrong. The Imperium absolutely sucks, kind of, compared to, you know, how things were before, perhaps before the Horus Heresy, for sure. But again, we're talking about a 1000 IQ, genetically mutated, warp-enhanced, superhuman being, basically a technological and esoteric demigod of humanity. So how does he react to this? Does he analyze? Does he observe? Does he come to any sort of, you know, conclusion that is so intellectually advanced that we can barely comprehend? Or does he moralize? Like any 16-year-old girl, and he says, or boy, whatever, I'm not a sexist, and he goes, no, this is wrong, I don't like this, the world sucks, I'm gonna do my own thing, you know? And he just basically, I dropped something, he just basically dises this universe that all of us have fallen in love with, and he sort of starts his own thing. And that's just one of many examples of how some of the most prominent characters in Warhammer completely disregard the premise of this setting, of this universe, this fictional universe that is so cool in concept. Not always in execution, but that's bound to happen. Another example is pretty much anything that has to do with, what's his name? Cole, Archmagus Cole. You know, a lot of people know that I don't necessarily appreciate or like that character. GW is kind of selling it as the new messiah of technological progress and advancement, and to me, I'm just disgusted because it's a very goofy character, the way it is presented. In less of coming off as Grimdark, whenever he does like objectively evil things, he just comes off as, oh well, he's just too self-absorbed, you know? To me, he's kind of the Sheldon of 40k. I'd never watched too much of the Big Bang Theory, but he gives off that vibe, like, oh, he's not evil, he's just autistic, you know? He's just too much into his own world, and he's always dropping zingers and like funny jokes and completely out of tone with the Warhammer universe, if you ask me. So what's the deal with that, right? Well, As some of you may know if you've watched my other videos, I'm not someone who only complains or who likes to only complain, but I actually like to offer suggestions, if you will, because at the end of the day, Warhammer is just an IP out of many IPs, and there will be perhaps a time in the future where people who are, only getting into the hobby today, only starting to know this universe today, will be the ones calling the shots for this IP in the future. And I'm not naive enough to believe that they will actually be watching this video, but what else can I do? I'm just a cog in the system. I have no effect whatsoever. I'm just a hobbyist, a silly hobbyist, drawing silly drawings and silly fan art of this universe. So here's the following is my analysis of what is happening and what can be done to better the situation of the recent stories of Warhammer. Again, I can't get fully into the premise of why actually stories have become softer, because that analysis I could make hours and hours of content on that analysis alone. But instead, let me tell you a story. When I studied acting, like professional acting, I was a professional actor for many years. I was a theater kid, yes. Don't worry, now I have a blue-collar job and I work with wrenches and gears and hydraulic equipment all day. I come home with my hands all greasy, so much so that I am embarrassed to even approach my wife until I have taken a shower. So yeah, don't worry, I have become based ever since. I earn my living with my sweat and blood from physical labor. But back in the day, I was just a theater kid, and as I was in college studying acting, I learned, I don't want to say a lot about storytelling, because I am a horrible storyteller, as you might have noticed, but I learned a thing or two about the different approaches to storytelling. And often we would be faced with the question of how do we play an evil character, a villain, someone that is objectively, morally disgusting. And of course, my teachers would always use this example, or even the students would sometimes ask, what if we have to play that, the bad guy in history, the guy with the mustache, the guy that got kicked out of, or rather that wasn't accepted into art school, who made a huge deal this past century, where a bunch of people unfortunately and tragically got unalived. Can I say that on YouTube? I was gonna say without being demonetized, but I'm not. This channel is not monetized. I don't know what the hell I'm talking about. And hold on, let me scratch my mustache here. And we would ask the instructor, the teacher, sorry, our acting teacher, how do we interpret that person? How do we play a character like that when our morality is clearly so far away from them? And the teacher gave us an answer that was quite honestly horrifying at the time, but very interesting. He said, you don't have the right to judge that character. From the moment that character, the bad guy with the mustache from history that everyone knows, whose initials are AH. Even if you're playing AH, from the moment you get the part, your job is not to scrutinize him as to all the things that he did wrong. That's why there are so many historians and philosophers and politicians who take care of that for you. History tells its own story. No, your job, what you're getting paid for, is to faithfully represent this character according to the script. That's the important part, not necessarily to history, but to the script. Now, based on the script what your character did, but it is not your job to judge that character. You don't have to, as a human, as a person in your day-to-day life, become that character, but unfortunately, as an actor, you have to take a deep dive into the darkness and justify to yourself if you are going to act him out, to impersonate him properly, again, in service to the script. The script is important here because, it might be a fictional script, or it might be based on true events, like whatever it is. It might be a comedy based on this character, because those have been written. For all we know, you are not the writer. Your job is to service the script to the best of your ability, and to the best of that ability, you should not morally judge this character, except for obviously when this character is morally judging himself, right? And I think that is very transferable to writing stories. Of course, I talked about the script and how important it is, and you may be thinking, well, an author has the right to change the story. No, I don't think he does. Well, he has the right to tell his own story, I suppose, because, big company with the rights to the IP literally gave him the rights. That's what they are called, rights. So he does have a right to tell his own story within this universe. But should he? No, just kidding. Or should they? But the script in this analogy would be the setting. To be faithful to the script is to be faithful to the setting. Once again, why did people fall in love so hard with this universe? What was it about this universe that made it so beloved by so many people, so impactful, and that got so many people attracted to it? Is it because, are you gonna start moralizing people it's just a bunch of weirdos that are into Grimdark? They're probably a bunch of if you go by what some of the things that these authors say, it's just probably a bunch of right-wing racist weirdos, incels, and so on, that don't want any sort of softness and morality in their story because they don't have any in their own lives. And no, that's absolutely not the case. You can tell a Grimdark story, and you can tell stories of Grimdark characters in a dark setting, but you have to understand them first, and you can't understand them if you're constantly judging them for the actions that they take. Now, the tragedy of Warhammer, Warhammer is not a tragedy, it's not presented as a tragedy, okay? It's a setting based on a war game that serves as a war game, as a tabletop miniature war game. So there must always be war. That is the premise of the story. Your job as an author is to tell a story within this world, whilst justifying why there must always be war. The lore itself just made an amazing job of justifying how humans are locked in this endless cycle of, yes, we have to be extremely we need to have a lot of prejudice. We have to be very discriminatory because and violent at times, because if we're not, chaos takes over. And the big tragedy again of it is that by being that way, by being so violent, so extremist, that's the actual word, so discriminatory towards everyone who strays from the Imperial Creed, at least regarding humanity and humans, by being that way, they are also, in their own way, fueling chaos. And so many of the coolest stories and most grimdark stories in Warhammer 40,000 and the Horus Heresy themselves show that almost helpless struggle and strive of humanity. And to all these authors who think that's a horrible thing, that's a horrible story to tell, I don't want to talk about that. I want to talk about human rights and activism, and I want to change the world. I say to this, well, some stories are bigger than yourself. And if you don't believe that, if you don't believe that there is a possibility that whatever your own ideals are should take a backseat to the story, then you should probably not be a writer in a universe shared by so many people, shared by so many other writers. Maybe you should write your own books, and there you can create whatever world you like with whatever morality you like, and just color it to your own liking. You can do your own thing. You don't have to come here and just stain everything with your pastel colors when everything is so jaded, so faded, so grimdark, so obscure, and that's how we like it over here on this side of the fence. I could talk about hours why these stories are important. I'm not sure these people understand it, but I guess I will mention it in passing. The truth of the matter is, it is something we can all relate to. To being in an endless cycle. It doesn't have to be violence or prejudice or extremism. Just the more you start to observe life itself, the more you find that, we ourselves are also caught in endless cycles. For example, there was a time when I was... Okay, no, I shouldn't say I was. I will say I am addicted to nicotine. Right? And the sad fact of the matter is, even though I don't smoke anymore or anything, the fact of the matter is, sometimes, I guess I've never shared anything in a video, but sometimes nicotine got me through the day because my life was so stressful at times. The problem is that I started to get very stressed when I didn't have access to a cigarette. And so it was a self-fulfilling prophecy, right? It was like a cycle of addiction, and that's how they get you. And that's just a very personal example, and I share that because I don't want to get too philosophical or too deep, but we all have cycles like that, like self-destructive cycles, but at the same time they are also they are kind of what gets us through. And the reason Warhammer is fiction is because only, I guess I don't want to get too much into spirituality, but the way the war warps in Warhammer is the only way that pretty much you can tell this story of why humans can't be too lenient, cannot be, literally can't be too open-minded, or they suffer the risk of giving in to these external forces of damnation. At the same time, by being this way, they are feeding the very same forces, and so they have to always walk this balance between being too right and being too wrong. And I think that is just a very interesting line to walk. It is a very interesting concept. It's a very interesting conflict of the soul, akin to Thus Spoke Zarathustra by Nietzsche, if you really want to get that deep. Not that I have any intentions of diving that deep in this video. But, I just don't understand why Black Library, having so many tools at their disposal, they choose to go that way with the Imperium, to change the Imperium so harshly, when they have access to different races. Let's take, for example, the Eldari, who are a very emotional race, a Xenos race. Obviously, they're not as famous or as mainstream as the Space Marines and the Imperium, but it's only because they don't put the effort, almost, because if they want to talk about a race who is pretty much guiding itself constantly by their own sense of morality and righteousness based on their sensibilities and fueled by their not the sensibility, sorry, fueled by their own emotional sensitivity to the entire universe, why not take a dive, just jump straight in and actually put the readers and the consumers of your products into the minds of an alien race that thinks completely different. And instead of cartoonizing all these characters, it's just every Xenos species has become cartoonized except the Tyranids, I guess, because they are supposed to be they barely touch them in the narrative anymore, basically. But the orcs have become a meme, the necrons have become a meme, and the Eldar have become a meme. Even in the Imperium has become a meme. Everything in Warhammer has become a meme, and unfortunately, the authors are giving into the meme, and they are now writing the meme. But they have such a good opportunity to tell this different stories of characters, perhaps more feminine characters, like literally feminine characters, because some Eldari factions literally have a literal matriarchy, at least the way I understand it. I don't know, I'm not a heretic, I don't read Xenos lore. Perhaps I should if I'm going to talk about these topics. But why not explore the world more through those eyes, But they seem to have such a hard time doing that. They seem to shy away from that because no, they want to be the good guys. They want to write about the heroes, and they want to permeate the heroes with their own morality, as I've said endlessly already. But I don't know, I think Warhammer should really take a page from their original inspirations like Dune by Frank Herbert and really dive into that, because the main character of Doom, Paul Atreides, at least of the first book, he is not a good guy, and yet you always understand while reading that book why he does what he does. Eventually, when his son, spoilers I guess, becomes the God Emperor of mankind. Does that sound familiar, Warhammer nerds? Read your Dune. The God Emperor of mankind literally appears in Dune. And he subjugates humanity, and he knows that what he's doing in the short term is morally wrong, but horribly enough, in the long term, it actually benefits humanity. And from his point of view, after thousands of years of subjugation and control, he was actually right, at least as far as I remember. Regardless of that, you always understand why he's doing what he's doing, why he makes the choices that he is making. So maybe they should take a page from that book, and in the process, we wouldn't be missing out on so many. God, I could talk about this for hours, but this video is already too long. I always take too long to dive into the topic, and by the time I finally dive into it, the videos become longer, but sorry about that. But the good news is I intend to produce a lot more of these videos, so feel free to stick for the ride. But just in closing, maybe, again, I would just like to leave with this message of some stories are bigger than ourselves, and you look at how our society and our entire culture is actually based on stories and how they transcend time and politics and contemporary morality and philosophy, and they actually tap into something much deeper within all of us, into our shared human experience and emotions. They tap into our collective unconscious, if you're a Jungian, I think it's it. I should say, sorry. So, yeah, perhaps be less self-centered and actually, ask yourself, wait a minute. What if instead of becoming a pretentious, annoying bastard while I'm writing this story and I make my character so, what if I just learn to see the world through their actual eyes and actually tell the stories that the characters want me to tell? That the setting actually needs me to tell. Not because, the fans will get angry if I don't. No, screw the fans. Find yourself, find your darkness, and just... Sorry, too much dust on my microphone. I should really wipe this thing. And maybe learn more about yourself in the process. Because I am a horrible writer, but I have tried writing at different periods and points through my life. But one thing I know is that every character wants to tell their own story, and the moment you start forcing them to tell, no, that's not the story that you want to tell, character. It's the story that I want to tell, and you will tell the story that I want to tell because I am the author, well, that's when you really fall into a narcissistic hole of self-centeredness, and that's when we get into self-inserts and so on and so on. And I want to talk about this for hours, but actually today is my anniversary and I believe my wife is now free, so I should perhaps go and join her. So with that being said, thanks for coming, thanks for watching, thanks for listening, and yeah, I would just let me know in the comments down below. Do you think I'm right? Do you think I'm wrong? Please, any criticism is more than welcome. I have a pretty thick skin, as I always say, and I can only learn from your comments and your criticism. So now I would love to know what you think about what I had to say in this video. And with that being said, remember, ad astra, there are no female custodies, and I'll see you on the next one.